She wasn't asking for anything. No sign, no outstretched hand, no words directed at anyone passing by. She was just sitting there, in the rain, on a cold concrete ledge outside a grocery store in Columbus, Ohio, with a stroller in front of her and a baby inside it, and tears running silently down her face. And nobody stopped. Until a tired single dad, a man who had already used up most of what he had just getting through the day, walked out of that store with his 4-year-old daughter and a bag of groceries. He almost kept walking. He had every reason to. He was exhausted. He had a child who needed dinner. He had a life that had already asked more of him than most people will ever understand. But his daughter tugged his hand, and she said 4 words that stopped him cold. "Daddy, that lady's crying." What happened next, over the course of 4 days, in a spare room that still carried the ghost of a woman he had loved and lost, would quietly change 2 lives in ways neither of them saw coming. This is their story. Stay with me. Ryan Caldwell was 34 years old, and he had learned the hard way that life doesn't always give you time to prepare before it changes everything. He lived in a modest house on the east side of Columbus, the kind of neighborhood where the lawns weren't always perfect, but the people generally knew each other's names. He drove a work truck with a company logo on the door, woke up before the sun most days, and spent his hours crawling into spaces most people never think about: attics, crawl spaces, the mechanical hearts of buildings, keeping things running that other people took for granted. He was good at his job, reliable, steady. At home, it was a different kind of work entirely. His daughter, Nora, was 4 years old, small and bright and full of the kind of constant, joyful noise that makes a quiet house feel alive. She had her mother's eyes. Ryan had noticed that early on, and he had made his peace with it, mostly, the way you make peace with things that are both beautiful and painful at the same time. Nora's mother, Claire, had been gone for 18 months. The music dips, a beat of quiet. Not suddenly, that's what people sometimes assume when they hear the word gone, as if it must have been quick. But Claire's death had not been quick. It had been 7 months of watching a woman who had been full of plans, a second child, a house with a backyard, a future that had seemed entirely reasonable, lose a slow and terrible fight with a rare autoimmune condition that had arrived without warning and left without apology. She had been 32 years old. Ryan didn't talk about it much. Not because he was ashamed or closed off, but because there's a particular kind of grief that doesn't translate well into words at dinner tables or quick conversations in parking lots. It lived in the quiet hours, after Nora was bathed and read to and finally asleep, in the stillness of a house that still, sometimes, felt like it had one more person in it than it actually did. He had learned to keep moving, for Nora's sake and for his own. He packed her lunches the night before, so mornings were smoother. He dropped her at his mother's house across town before work, picked her up in the evenings, and made dinner while she sat at the kitchen counter telling him everything that had happened in her day, in the detailed stream of consciousness way that 4-year-olds do, as though every moment is equally important, which, when you think about it, is not the worst way to live. He read to her every night, the same 3 books, rotating, because Nora had opinions about her books and she was not shy about sharing them. And on Wednesday evenings, sometimes, he stopped at the grocery store on Broad Street on the way home, the one that smelled like fresh bread near the entrance, to pick up what they needed for the rest of the week. That Wednesday, Nora was with him, bundled in her yellow raincoat, holding his hand and telling him something very important about what her friend at school had said, the details of which Ryan was only half absorbing because he was running a mental inventory of whether they were out of oatmeal. They were out of oatmeal. He was tired. It had been a long day on a rooftop in the drizzle. He had approximately enough energy left to get through dinner, bath time, and 1 book. Maybe 2 if Nora pushed for it, which she would. He had no idea what was waiting for him outside. The rain had been falling since early afternoon. By 7 in the evening, it had settled into that particular kind of slow, relentless drizzle that doesn't announce itself dramatically. It just soaks through everything gradually, until you realize too late that you're completely wet. The streets of Columbus were quiet, slick and golden under the streetlights. Most people were already inside, in warm kitchens and lit living rooms, tucked into that ordinary comfort that people rarely stop to appreciate until it's gone. Ryan pushed through the sliding doors with a bag of groceries in one hand and Nora's hand in the other, and that's when he saw her. She was sitting on the narrow concrete ledge near the store entrance, partially under the overhang above the sliding doors, though not nearly enough of her was sheltered to matter. The rain caught the edges of her coat, her hair, the faded fabric of the stroller in front of her. The stroller.
He registered it before he registered much else. An older model, worn plastic wheels, a thin blanket draped across the opening. And inside it, small and still and wrapped in that blanket that looked damp at its edges, was a baby. The woman wasn't looking at anyone. She wasn't asking for anything. She had no sign, no extended hand, no words directed at the strangers walking past. She was simply sitting there with her head slightly bowed. And she was crying. Not loudly, not the kind of crying that demands attention. It was the quiet kind, the slow, worn-down kind that comes after everything louder has already been used up. Her shoulders moved in that particular rhythm that tells you, if you're paying attention, that the tears have been going on for a very long time. She was wearing a thin, gray zip-up jacket, the kind made for mild autumn days, not cold rain. Her hair was pulled back loosely, dark strands pressed wet against the sides of her face. Beside her, nothing, no bags, just the stroller and a small backpack hanging from its handles that looked nearly empty. Nearly empty. Ryan's feet slowed without him making a conscious decision to slow them. He was a practical man. He ran through logistics the way he ran through everything, efficiently, honestly. He was tired. He had a 4-year-old. He had groceries getting cold. He had 2 exits from this moment, and one of them was simply to keep walking, and nobody would have blamed him for it. Nora made the decision for him. She stopped walking entirely, turned, and pointed with the direct, unself-conscious certainty that only small children allow themselves. "Daddy," she said, "that lady is crying." Ryan crouched down beside his daughter so they were eye level. "I see her, sweetheart. Why is she crying?" He looked at the woman on the ledge, at the baby in the stroller, at the near-empty backpack, at the rain falling steadily past the edge of the overhang. "I don't know yet," he said, honestly. He stood up. He hesitated, 1 full breath, maybe 2, and then he walked over. He stopped a few feet away, close enough to be heard, far enough not to crowd her. "Hey," he said, keeping his voice quiet and even. "I'm sorry to bother you. Are you okay?" The woman looked up. Her eyes were reddened, not dramatically, but the way eyes get after a long time of crying and then stopping and then starting again. Her expression carried that particular combination of exhaustion and embarrassment that comes from being seen in a moment of collapse by a stranger. She looked at him, then at Nora, who was watching her with wide, entirely open eyes. "I'm fine," the woman said. Ryan held her gaze for a moment. "You don't have to be fine," he said. It came out simply, without pressure, without performance. "I'm not trying to intrude. My daughter saw you and she was worried. And honestly, so was I." The woman's chin moved. Something in her face shifted, not breaking, not quite, but coming close to it. She looked back down at the stroller. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't have anywhere to go tonight." The rain, the quiet. "I thought I had a plan," she continued. Her voice was steady but thin. "And the plan fell through, and She stopped, exhaled slowly. "I just needed a minute." Music softens further. The world outside the overhang feels distant. It's just the 2 of them and the rain. Her name was Lori Weston. She told him piece by piece, not all at once, the way you might tell a story you've had time to organize, but haltingly, the way people tell things they haven't yet fully processed themselves. She was 28 years old. She had come to Columbus from Cincinnati 6 weeks earlier, chasing a job offer that she had been told was confirmed, a position at a distribution warehouse, secure, ready to start. She had her daughter, Cora, who was 6 months old. She had her savings, which were modest but real. She had a plan that made sense. She had left Cincinnati behind, the apartment she could no longer afford after losing her previous job, when the small packaging company she'd worked at for 3 years shut its doors with almost no warning. She had packed what she and Cora could carry, driven the 2 hours to Columbus, and arrived believing that this was finally the turn she'd been waiting for.
The job had not materialized. A paperwork issue, the staffing agency told her. Then a hiring freeze. Then they stopped returning her calls entirely. She spent the first 3 weeks in a budget motel, watching her savings dissolve one night at a time. After that, she found a room in a shared house, a woman renting out a spare room, informally, cheap enough that Lori believed she could manage until something came through. She applied to everything she could find. She had an interview scheduled for the following Monday, a logistics coordinator position at a supply company on the east side of Columbus, a real one this time. She just needed to get to Monday. That morning, the woman who owned the house had knocked on her door and told her she needed the room back, immediately, for a family member. She had no legal right to do that, but Lori had no lease. no written agreement, no ground to stand on. She had until noon. She packed everything that she and Cora could carry, which wasn't much. She put Cora in the stroller, and she went to the county community services office, and she sat in a waiting room for 4 hours with a 6-month-old in her lap, filling out forms, waiting, hoping. They told her the emergency family shelter had no available beds that week. Check back in 2 days. 2 days. She had come to the grocery store to buy infant fever medicine. Cora had developed a mild temperature, not alarming, not high, but the kind that makes a mother press her wrist gently against a baby's forehead every 20 minutes just to be sure. She had used the restroom inside to change Cora, and then she had come back out, and she had sat down on the ledge, and she had not known where else to go. And the crying had simply arrived, the way it does when you have held it together for as long as you possibly can. Ryan listened to all of it. He stood in the rain with his groceries in one hand and Nora pressed against his side, and he didn't interrupt. He didn't rush to fill the silences with reassurances. He didn't offer the kind of quick, reflexive comfort that people sometimes reach for in uncomfortable moments, the "it'll be okay and things work out," that are meant more to relieve the speaker than the person speaking. He just listened, and when she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "My daughter's running a little warm," Lori said, glancing at the stroller. The love and the fear were both right there in her voice, side by side. "She's okay. The fever's not high, I checked, but I need to get her somewhere dry." Ryan looked at the stroller, at Nora, at the rain. He thought about the 18 months behind him, the neighbor who had left food on his porch without being asked, the coworker who had quietly covered his shift the week after Claire died, without making it into something that required gratitude or explanation. The small, unremarkable kindnesses that had held him together when he hadn't even fully realized he was falling apart. He knew what it meant when someone simply showed up. "I have a spare room," Ryan said. Lori looked at him. He could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, the wariness, the exhaustion, the very reasonable caution that a woman alone with a baby in the rain has every right to feel when a stranger makes an offer like that.
"I know how that sounds," he said quickly, calmly. "I'm not asking you to trust me just because I said it. My name is Ryan Caldwell. I'm a single dad. My daughter is right here with me." He glanced down at Nora, who was still watching Lori with that wide, solemn attention. "I work for a company called Holbrook Heating and Cooling. You can look it up right now on your phone. You can call the main line and ask if I work there. I'll give you my supervisor's name." He paused. "The room has a door that locks," he said, "from the inside." Lori stared at him. The rain fell between them, steady and quiet. From the stroller, Cora made a small sound, soft and sleepy, the involuntary noise of a baby shifting in half-sleep. Lori's eyes went to her daughter immediately, instinctively, the way a mother's eyes always do. When she looked back at Ryan, something had shifted. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Not with suspicion. The suspicion had softened into something more genuine. She was asking because she actually wanted to know. Why you? Why now? Why any of this? Ryan thought about it before he answered, which was how he did most things, honestly, without rushing. "Because somebody did something like this for me once, when I really needed it." He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. "And I've been trying to figure out how to pass that forward ever since." Lori held his gaze for a long moment. Nora, apparently deciding that the adult conversation had gone on long enough, reached out and very gently touched the handle of the stroller. "Is your baby okay?" she asked. Lori's breath caught, just for a second. "She's going to be," she said softly. She stood up, adjusted the stroller, pulled the thin jacket a little tighter. "Okay," she said. "Okay." They walked to Ryan's car together, the three of them and Cora, through the rain, under the pale light of the parking lot. Nobody said very much. There wasn't much that needed saying yet.
Ryan's spare room had been used mostly for storage since Claire passed. It wasn't a sad room. It wasn't the kind of room that felt abandoned or hollow. It was just a room that had been waiting for something to do, full of boxes that had been easy to leave closed, and a folding table that had no particular purpose. He moved what he could into the hallway, found fresh sheets in the linen closet, and called his mother to ask if she still had the small folding crib from when Nora was an infant. She did. She brought it over within the hour, without asking many questions, which was its own kind of kindness. Lori was quiet in the way that people are when they are deeply, acutely aware that they are occupying borrowed space. She kept her things contained to the room and the bathroom. She said please and thank you with the frequency of someone who did not want to be misunderstood. She offered to help with dishes, and then she helped without being told twice. She was not a burden. She was a person in a temporary crisis, which is a different thing entirely, though the world doesn't always take the time to make that distinction. Nora, for her part, was utterly fascinated by Cora. She would position herself near the baby with the focused scientific intensity of a child conducting important research, watching Cora's hands open and close, studying the way she blinked, noting with great seriousness when Cora made sounds and what those sounds might mean. She reported her findings to Ryan at dinner each evening. "She grabbed my finger today, Daddy." "Did she?" "Yes, she's very strong." By the second morning, Cora's fever had broken. Lori sat in the kitchen while Ryan made coffee, and when she pressed her wrist to Cora's forehead and found it cool, just normal, she closed her eyes for a moment and exhaled the kind of breath that takes a long time to build. "Thank you," she said. She was not only talking about the coffee. Ryan set a mug in front of her and sat down across the table. "How are you feeling about Monday?" "Nervous," she said. "Honest."
Lori left for her interview at 8:30. Ryan had already taken Nora to his mother's house. He came home to a quiet house and a pot of coffee Lori had made before she left, more than she needed specifically so there would be some for him. He noticed that. He didn't say anything about it, but he noticed. He spent the morning making phone calls. He hadn't planned to, but somewhere between getting home from the grocery store that Wednesday night and waking up Thursday morning, something had shifted in him. A quiet, purposeful energy that felt unfamiliar and right at the same time. He called his company's HR department and asked about the employee assistance program he'd vaguely heard about at some orientation years ago and never thought about since. He asked about housing resources. He was on hold twice and transferred once, and in the end, he came away with the name and number of a housing resource center on the north side of Columbus that specifically helped working families secure affordable units. He'd had no idea it existed. He left the information on the kitchen table with a note that said only, "This might help. No pressure." Lori's interview lasted 45 minutes. She was offered the position before she left the building. She called Ryan from the parking lot, and when he picked up, she said, "I got it," and her voice broke on both words, not with sadness, but with the particular overwhelm of something you have worked very hard for and almost stopped believing would come. "Of course you did," he said. She started the following Monday. In the 10 days between, she contacted the Housing Resource Center, began the application process for an affordable unit in a building designed for working families on Columbus's east side, and, with a small advance from her new employer and a great deal of careful math, moved into her new apartment with Cora before the end of the month.
The morning Lori left, she sat at Ryan's kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her mug and didn't say anything for a little while. Ryan sat across from her, refilling his own coffee, not rushing it. "I don't know how to repay this," she said finally. "You don't," he said simply, not harshly, easily, as if it were just a fact of physics. "That's not how it works." She looked at him carefully, the way you look at someone when you've been living alongside them for a few days and you've started to see past the surface of them, the way you look at someone you've been trying to figure out. "You're still grieving, aren't you?" she said. It wasn't an intrusion, it was an observation. Quiet and accurate and offered gently. Ryan was quiet for a moment. Outside the kitchen window, Nora was in the backyard in her yellow raincoat. It had drizzled again that morning, a light, soft kind of rain, talking to herself in the way that children do when they are wholly absorbed in a private world that only they can see. She was crouching near something on the ground, examining it with great seriousness. A leaf, maybe, or a bug. Something small that only a child would think to stop for. "Yeah, I am." He turned his coffee cup in his hands. "But I've figured out that grief and helping somebody else aren't mutually exclusive." He paused. "That took me a while to learn." Lori looked at him for a moment longer. Then she nodded, slowly, as if she were filing that away somewhere important. She buckled Cora into the stroller, the same worn stroller, though Cora seemed larger somehow than she had 5 days ago, more present, more herself. Nora came in from the backyard to say goodbye, and she did so with great formality, presenting Cora with a drawing she had made that morning. 2 figures, one large and one very small, standing in the rain under what appeared to be a yellow umbrella, though it could also have been a large sun. "That's you and Cora," Nora explained, with the artist's patience for those who need things explained. Lori took the drawing and folded it carefully and put it in her jacket pocket. "I'll keep it forever," she said, and she meant it. Ryan stood in the doorway and watched them go. Lori pushed the stroller down the front walk and paused at the sidewalk, turning back once. "Thank you, Ryan," she said. Just that. "Take care of her." He meant Cora. He also meant Lori. She nodded, and then she walked on.
Months later, Ryan would find himself struggling to explain to people what had changed after that week. Because nothing dramatic had shifted, not on the surface. He still woke before sunrise, he still drove to job sites in the cold, and spent his days in the mechanical, hidden spaces of buildings. He still packed Nora's lunches the night before, and read to her every night, and missed Claire in the quiet hours, that particular, specific missing that doesn't get smaller exactly, but that you learn to carry differently over time, the way you adjust to weight. But something had loosened. That was the only word for it. Something in his chest, something that had gone rigid without him fully noticing, had loosened, the way a window that's been stuck shut for too long finally lets in air. You don't realize how much you'd been holding your breath until the air moves again. He had walked out of a grocery store on a rainy Wednesday evening and seen a woman sitting alone, with a baby and nearly nothing else. He had seen someone at the absolute edge of what she could hold, and she had not given up. She had been sitting in the rain, crying quietly, with a job interview 4 days away, stubborn, exhausted, still there, still going. He had found a woman who had lost nearly everything she had worked for, and who was still, quietly, stubbornly, without any announcement, holding on to what she had not yet lost. And something about that had reminded him of something he hadn't fully realized he'd been forgetting. Soft music, steady and warm. Hope doesn't make announcements. It doesn't arrive with a guarantee or a promise about what's waiting on the other side. It doesn't ask you to be certain. It only asks you to take the next step, and then the one after that, and to keep your eyes open, because sometimes the step that matters most isn't even your own. It's the one you help someone else take.
Nora still asks about Cora sometimes. She does it the way children bring up important things, casually, while doing something entirely unrelated, while coloring or eating cereal or getting her shoes on. "Daddy, how's the baby?" she'll ask, as though no time has passed at all. Ryan always tells her that Cora is doing well, because she is. And on rainy evenings, on the drives home when the streetlights turn the wet pavement gold and the windshield wipers keep their quiet rhythm, Ryan finds himself watching the world a little more closely than he used to. Not anxiously, not from obligation, just in case someone out there is sitting in the rain and needs a minute. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your own rain or of someone who once stood in yours, share it. Send it to someone who needs to hear it today. Leave a comment and tell me what stayed with you. And if you haven't yet, please subscribe to Everhart Tales, because every single week there's another story waiting to be told. Thank you so much for being here. It genuinely means the world.